Benjamin Hotton. In early 2021, 47-year-old Air Force veteran Benjamin Hotton woke up to a painful swelling on his left testicle. But before it got to this, he had actually been diagnosed with testicular cancer in 1989 and underwent chemotherapy treatment. So when he woke up with serious ball pain, he went to the hospital and found out the cancerous cells were back. And this time, chemotherapy wasn't going to solve the problem. The doctor had to go in and literally cut out the left testicle to prevent the cancer from spreading any further. So the verdict was in and they booked a day to perform the surgery. Now this is where things get weird because for some reason the surgeon made a huge mistake and removed the wrong testicle. That's right, this guy left with the cancer and chomped off the only good one left. It's like taking your car to the mechanic shop because the engine is rattling and the mechanic removes the wheels instead. Well, when Hotton woke up and learnt what had happened to him in the theater, all hell broke loose. In fact, he actually thought they were playing a prank on him, and honestly, you can't even blame this guy because what a nut-cracking revelation. Of course, he furiously filed a lawsuit against the entire hospital and the surgeon for their huge error and was settled with the sum of $200,000 and an apology from the doctors who operated on him. Willie King. Now, it was a chilly, calm day on February 20th, 1995, and 51-year-old Willie King, who had been suffering from diabetes for 20 years, was scheduled to have his right leg amputated at the University Community Hospital in Tampa, Florida. The guy was already bracing himself for one of life's cruelest cuts, literally, but little did he know he was about to hop straight into the medical blooper reel of the century, because the nurse on duty listed the wrong leg for amputation in the hospital's operating room schedule. So naturally, when the operating surgeon came in, he looked at the system, saw the incorrect leg, and with the confidence of a chef carving up a Thanksgiving turkey, he got to hacking. And it was literally midway that the clumsy nurse realized she had made a terrible mistake, but the damage was already halfway complete. Like bones and tendons were literally already cut through. Now, Willie was in a world of trouble. He had one leg halfway in the trash can, and just to make matters worse, he still had the original leg, his right leg, the actual bad one, just waiting to be removed, which basically just made him crippled. So what do you do when the medical profession gives you lemons? Well, if you're like Willie, you take those lemons, squeeze them into the hospital's eye, and sue for $1.15 million. Thomas and Nancy Andrew. If you've been to a restaurant to get some food, but the kitchen or waiter got your order mixed up, maybe you ordered a burger and fries, but got sushi instead, then you already have an idea of Thomas and Nancy Andrews' situation. Except in Thomas and Nancy's case, the mix-up could not be undone for life. It all started when Thomas and Nancy were trying to have a baby, but soon realized it was not working the natural way at all. So they decided to take a scenic detour down the path of in vitro fertilization. Think of it like trying to get into an exclusive club, but needing a VIP pass for your eggs and sperm to meet. They headed to a New York clinic where Thomas and Nancy gave the parts that were required by the doctor for the procedure. Then the doctor played the very important role of matchmaker in a petri dish. The idea was simple. Introduce Thomas's swimmers to Nancy's eggs. Let nature do its thing, but in a dish. And pop the fertilized egg back into Nancy's womb. What could go wrong, right? Well, fast forward 9 months after the usual roller coaster of pregnancy, Nancy finally gave birth. And here's where things get interesting. Nancy's baby comes black. And if you're doing the math, that's a bit of a head scratcher because Nancy is Hispanic and Thomas is Caucasian. You don't need to be a geneticist to know something wasn't adding up here. After the initial shock and likely a very few awkward conversations, the couple did what anyone would do. They got 3 DNA tests and it revealed that Nancy was definitely the mother, but well, Thomas's swimmers were not the ones who made the cut. Somewhere along the line, the clinic had mixed up the sperm samples and handed them a kid with a mystery father. Naturally, Thomas and Nancy were devastated. It's not every day that you go to pick up your baby and end up with an accidental surprise package. They sued the clinic, of course, for an undisclosed amount of money and won their case, but they still had to raise a child who who, despite the clinic's colossal blunder, was partially theirs. Jessica Santillan. In 2003, 17-year-old Jessica Santillan was diagnosed with restrictive cardiomyopathy, which meant her heart and lungs weren't working properly. She needed a transplant to survive, and fortunately, the doctors found organ donors. Now, the first rule of organ transplant is to make sure the donor organs are a match, right? Well, these guys skipped that rule entirely and chucked an organ that didn't match her blood type into her already sick body. Well, after the transplant, instead of feeling better, Jessica's condition took a nosedive faster than a plane without a pilot, and when the doctors realized their silly mistake, her immune system was already in full attack mode. It's like trying to fill your car with water when it runs on diesel. Of course, it won't work properly. Now, desperate to fix the mess they made, the doctors attempted a second transplant just 2 weeks later, but Jessica's body had taken too much damage and she sadly passed away shortly after. The hospital faced a firestorm of criticism from her parents and the public, who were left shaking their heads in disbelief. And well, they were sued for a huge amount of money that remains undisclosed to the public. Donald Church. After an open-body operation, it's weird but not very unusual for doctors to forget small surgical tools like forceps and scissors inside the patient's body. But in the case of Donald Church, the doctors forgot an entire 32-centimeter metal tool inside him. It all started in 2000 when Donald Church went in for surgery to remove a large tumor in his stomach. Now, the entire surgery was successful except for one little problem. Mr. Church was given an internal unwanted souvenir, which was basically a metal retractor the size of a ruler. The surgical team in charge of his operation had used the extractor to pry open his abdomen, but just left it there afterwards and then stitched the whole belly up. How do you even forget the entire extractor inside your patient? Well, Mr. Church had the same exact question for the hospital after he felt severe pain and discomfort weeks after the surgery. He even set off the metal detector at the airport one time. He sadly had to be put through another stressful surgery just so they could remove the freaking metal tool they left in him in the first place. And thank God they were more careful this time and left only blood and body tissue in him before closing up. Well, Mr. Church wasn't going to go through all that emotional and physical pain for nothing, so he sued the hospital, which paid him $100,000 as compensation for their mistake. Colton Reed. Just imagine going in for a haircut and walking out bald. Not because you asked for it, but because the barber got a little too excited with the scissors. Now, swap that barber for a surgeon, and instead of your hair, it's your organs on the line. That's the nightmare 20-year-old Colton Reed went through in 2009 after he went in for a simple medical procedure that quickly turned into a full-blown horror show. Basically, this guy just checked into the David Grant Medical Center in California for a routine gallbladder surgery. Now, gallbladder surgery is a fairly standard procedure. It's supposed to be a get in, get out, and get better kind of deal, but during the operation, the surgeon punctured Reed's aorta, the body's main artery that carries blood from the heart to the rest of the body. That's the medical equivalent of someone accidentally cutting the main power line while trying to fix a light bulb. To make matters worse, the medical team did not recognize the severity of the situation until it was too late. While they worked to repair the damage, blood flow to Colton's legs had been cut off for too long. The lack of circulation caused massive tissue damage, and the situation became so critical that doctors had no choice but to amputate both of his legs. Just imagine the horror of going to remove a simple gallbladder and waking up without legs. The craziest part is that the surgeons didn't even remove the gallbladder. The situation sparked outrage and led to a lawsuit against the Air Force, as well as questions about how such a catastrophic error could have happened. And although Colton and his family eventually received compensation, no amount of money could ever restore the life Colton had before that fateful surgery. Bob East. As an award-winning photographer, the worst thing that can possibly happen to you is getting cancer in the eye. Because how the F are you supposed to take award-winning pictures when you can't see anything? That's honestly a very cruel joke, and it was exactly what happened to a man named Bob East. Now, instead of being sad and miserable about losing his eye, Bob decided to donate the cancerous eye for scientific research. Well, on the day of the surgery at Miami-Jackson Memorial Hospital, the stage was set for what should have been a straightforward procedure. What could go wrong, right? Just pop out the bad eye, hand it over to the science geeks, and Bob would walk away as the guy who lost an eye but won at being awesome. But then, well, enter the devil. And this devil wasn't wearing red horns, it was hiding in a bottle of formaldehyde. You know, the stuff that's supposed to preserve things like dissected frogs and, in this case, a cancerous eye. While Bob was getting prepared, a nurse brought in an unmarked vial of a formaldehyde-like solution meant to preserve the eye after its removal. But in a twist worthy of a horror medical thriller, an anesthetist mistook the vial for anesthesia and injected the toxic fluid directly into Bob's spine. The result was nothing short of catastrophic. The corrosive solution went straight to Bob's brain and caused total chaos. Think of it like asking for coffee and getting pure battery acid instead. Bob didn't even get a chance to give a side eye to the situation, no pun intended, because the damage was instant, and tragically within hours, Bob was declared brain dead. 5 days later, Bob succumbed to the toxic injection's effects, leaving behind a story that sounds like the setup for a really bad medical mystery novel. Judge Nelson Bailey. So, Judge Nelson Bailey, a distinguished man of the law, geared up for a routine surgery to tackle his diverticulitis, a condition that makes your gut feel like it's gone through a roller coaster without the fun. He checks into Good Samaritan Medical Center, ready to perform the quick surgery, but little did Judge Bailey know he was about to be the unwilling star of his own botched episode. Well, the surgery went as planned, or so he thought, because a couple of days later, he's in more pain than a footballer who's just been side-tackled. When he goes back to the hospital to complain about the pain, Bailey's doctor orders a CT scan and, surprise, they discover a surgical sponge casually chilling inside his body like it was on an all-inclusive vacation. Now, a sponge's job is to basically soak up messes, not be the mess, and this wasn't your average sponge, but a 12-inch by 12-inch surgical sponge. This thing was the MVP of surgical blunders, causing such damage that part of Judge Bailey's intestines had to be removed. Now, if you think that's the end of his medical misadventure, then think again, because it gets worse. After the sponge fiasco, the hospital's pharmacy decided to up the ante by giving him the wrong medication. And we're not talking about mixing up Tylenol with Advil. This mistake almost triggered a heart attack. At this point, he was probably asking himself whether having the original disease was better than the hospital trying to help. Talk about killing two birds with one stone, or in this case, nearly killing one judge with two mistakes. After surviving these 2 rounds of medical mayhem, Judge Bailey wasn't about to let this slide. He took the hospital to court, a place he's more than familiar with, and sued the Good Samaritan Medical Center, owned by one of the largest healthcare corporations, Tenant Healthcare, for every single penny. Kim Tutt. Kim Tutt was living her life like any ordinary person when she got hit with the kind of news that makes you question the universe's sense of humor. She was told she had cancer in her jaw and was given a grim prognosis, 3 to 6 months to live. Now, if you think this is the part where she gets a superhero cape and miraculously recovers, you'd be half right. The miraculous recovery part happened, but the cape was literally a disfigured chin and jaw. You see, Kim's doctors told her they could extend her life by removing part of her jaw, and in a desperate bid to have more time with her 2 sons, she agreed to the surgery. But this is where shit hit the fan, literally. It turns out Kim never had cancer. Yep, the biopsy had been cross-contaminated, and Kim didn't need to lose part of her face at all. So not only did she have to deal with the emotional roller coaster of thinking she was on borrowed time, but now she had to live with the permanent disfigurement caused by a surgery she never needed. Candy Negrete. So every woman knows how extremely important it is to always check your boobs for any sort of lump and stuff. Candy Negrete knew this, and it was during one of her routine checkups that she noticed a lump in her right breast. Of course, she ran to the doctor's office faster than Sonic the Hedgehog and had the weird lump removed. However, a few weeks later, instead of her breasts getting back to normal, they started to swell like she was secretly smuggling a plum or maybe an entire fruit salad. And if that wasn't enough of a party trick, the thing's also leaking some sort of ooze, because why not add a little horror movie special effects to the situation? She goes back to the hospital and the doctor drains the fluid, tells her everything's fine, and sends her home. Well, spoiler alert, everything was not fine. For 10 more weeks, her breast kept growing like it was preparing for some weird sequel to puberty, and the leaking only got worse. It got so bad she'd wake up every night covered in goo, probably wondering if she was morphing into a jellyfish. The situation actually gets worse because one day she wakes up and looks under her armpit and surprise, there's another breast growing there. Well, this time she went to get a second opinion, and this was when the new doctor confirmed that there was definitely something in there. During surgery, the doctor pulls out what can only be described as a medical horror souvenir, a huge ball of tissue that had formed around a forgotten surgical sponge. Yep, someone left behind a literal sponge. Candy, understandably not amused by this impromptu sponge bath, sued the hospital and got a $250,000 settlement and an extra $16,000 for her medical bills. As crazy and deadly as all these mistakes sound, the worst mistake you can actually make now is not subscribing to our Discord server for more exciting information. Enrique Ruiz. Picture this. You walk into surgery hoping to get a simple breathing tube inserted, and instead you wake up with your chest literally on fire. That's what happened to Enrique Ruiz in 2012 at Lincoln Hospital in New York. Poor Enrique was admitted with pneumonia and bronchitis, a pretty standard set of lung issues, and needed a tracheotomy to help him breathe easier. Well, the surgeon, Dr. J. Yalone, got a little too friendly with his electronic scalpel near the oxygen supply, and a spark from the scalpel ignited the oxygen and poof, a minor explosion engulfed Enrique's chest and neck. So instead of waking up relieved that he could finally breathe, Enrique woke up thinking he had been cooked for lunch. He suffered second-degree burns, leaving him with not just a tracheotomy scar, but some extra crispy skin. To add to the drama, the surgeon didn't even mention the burns in the post-op report. The family of the victim was unable to sue the hospital because they said it was a normal occurrence, and Enrique's burns would heal without complications. Dan Wingard. Dan Wingard, a 45-year-old man from Michigan, found himself in a rather unusual and unfortunate situation during a medical procedure in 2018. Wingard went to a local hospital for a routine surgery. Nothing too dramatic, just a simple gallbladder removal. But little did he know, he was about to become part of a horror story that would land him in the medical malpractice spotlight. As Wingard was undergoing surgery, the surgeon mistakenly cut his bile duct instead of simply removing his gallbladder. Now that's one way to take going under the knife to a whole new level. Instead of feeling light as a feather post-surgery, Wingard was facing an array of complications, including serious digestive issues and the need for additional surgeries. Talk about going from gallbladder to gall-blasted. The aftermath was no laughing matter, though. Dan faced extensive medical treatments and recovery time, which led him to pursue legal action against the hospital and the surgeon involved. After a lengthy legal battle, the jury sided with Wingard, awarding him a whopping $22.4 million in damages. That's enough to make any gallbladder go green with envy.